Sean P. Diddy Combs is suing NBC Universal for $100 million for calling him Lucifer. NBC Universal's fighting back, saying that everybody was calling him that. Diddy said, no, they weren't. They called me Brother Love, or Diddy, or P. Diddy. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get into some of this straight game.
Life is like the cards. It's not what you dealt, but how you play it. Play each situation correctly. I remember they used to laugh at a brother.
Welcome back, guys. Welcome back. It's your boy Delray Richardson, platinum artist, platinum songwriter, Straight Game TV, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in. I hit the thumbs up button. Also, subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And like I always say, if you want to be one of the first people notified when I drop some of this straight game, please do me a favor and click on what appears to be that little bell notification right below this video, ladies and gentlemen. Look, it's been a lot of slander. It's been a lot of what seems to be or could be considered defamation going around when the situation looked dire for Diddy, ladies and gentlemen. There have been a couple of documentaries that have been done that I don't even think are worthy of releasing now, based on the fact that Diddy was not convicted in the way that a lot of people anticipated that he would. And for that reason, Diddy, before him knowing whether he was going to be innocent or guilty of any of the alleged charges that he was charged with, he was already fighting back. We discussed the $50 million lawsuit against Ariel Mitchell and Courtney Burgess. But today we're going to talk about the $100 million lawsuit that Diddy filed against NBC Universal. And they're fighting back. Ladies and gentlemen, we got to take a deep dive. And like I said, this is one of the biggest battles between two, I would say, conglomerates, Diddy and him being who he is. Nowhere the size of an NBC Universal, but like I say, being a formidable opponent when it comes to filing lawsuits and really having the means and the financial wherewithal to be able to mount a legal a fight against someone as big as NBC Universal. And so, like I said, Sean Diddy Combs is suing Universal for $100 million, claiming that their making of a Bad Boy documentary defamed him. But now NBC is pushing back hard, right? So NBC basically just filed a motion to dismiss Sean P. Diddy Combs' claims. They filed a motion in the lawsuit arguing that the film is constitutionally protected, if you will, by the Constitution, doesn't accuse Diddy of any crimes and simply reflects existing public narratives, if you will. I haven't really had a chance because it was so many people just dropping documentaries. They were dropping documentaries like hot records when Diddy was going through it, and people were basically sucking it up. My thing was, I just thought that, if anybody else was on trial, they would like, to be considered innocent until proven guilty. And I think a lot of what Diddy was fighting for was basically a fair trial and not someone tainting the jury of public opinion or people who would then become jurors in his case, right? And so, like I said, NBC basically saying, hey, you know what? Our documentary is constitutionally protected and doesn't accuse Diddy of any crimes and simply reflects existing public narratives. So let's break this down. Like I said, once again, it's one thing to say something in a legal document when you file it in court, but it's another thing as to what was actually said and that the person is suing about, right? And to give you that full, the full transparency as to what that is and what that means, I think is very, very, very important, ladies and gentlemen. So like I said, the lawsuit breakdown, once again, what somebody says in a legal document may not be consistent with what was said in the actual thing that they're being sued for. One must understand that. So here's You know what we know. Back in January, Peacock, a part of NBC Universal, aired the making of a Bad Boy documentary covering Diddy and his rise in music, but also delving into the decades of allegations, abuse, manipulation, and criminal conduct. And they had various people come on and speak in regards to Diddy and, you know, working with him and knowing him and so on and so forth, right? Diddy basically fired back with $100 million defamation lawsuit, basically saying that the documentary portrayed him as a violent, misogynistic, Epstein-like criminal mastermind, right? And this is the thing, like I said, when somebody wants to craft the public opinion, or should I say, curate the public opinion about you, you know, it's done in this way, if you will. So Diddy fired back. Basically, they saying he was like an Epstein-like criminal mastermind. His legal team took special issue. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, because this is what his legal team took issue with, right? His legal team took special issue with the comparisons to Lucifer and language implying he's abusive and predatory and behind the deaths of Kim Porter, Biggie Smalls, and Heavy D, ladies and gentlemen. Get it? So basically, they saying that he was behind the death of Kim Porter, of Biggie Smalls, and Heavy D. I've heard a lot of this being said on different platforms, like I said, on the internet. Like I said, people thinking that Diddy had something to do. Remember, I told you guys about the book that was written also from that perspective. And that was a bunch of lies that talked about a bunch of those things too. Like I said, you can see that interview over on Art of Dialogue if you have not seen it already. Very interesting, like I said. And this book came out shortly before Diddy was arrested. But after Diddy was arrested, they started this major league campaign. And then all of these other documentaries started to drop, right? So, but NBC Universal, Peacock, and Ample Entertainment say none of this was presented as fact. Ladies and gentlemen. So now they're arguing after the documentary has been, you know, out there, you know, after all of the hype. And like, for me, I don't think the documentary really did that well. You know, like I said, I didn't see it, to be perfectly honest with you. And it wasn't that I couldn't see it. It just didn't catch me, like I said, because I know a lot of people want to have a lot of things to say when they think that somebody's having a bad time, or someone like Diddy or whoever, you know. And I was like, well, you know, I don't know whether Diddy guilty, innocent, whatever. You know, we seen the Cassie tape, boom, guilty of that. We saw that. You know what I mean? Bottom line, you couldn't argue that. But as to all of these other things, I didn't really know. So I didn't really, you know, and me being a YouTuber and having a podcast, I just want to, you know, reserve the right to say, okay, you know what? I don't know. And like I said, if you go look back on the videos, that's what I've always said, right? So NBC and Peacock and Ample Entertainment say none of this that they aired on here, it did air. They were talking about him, you know, partially being responsible for the death of Kim Porter, Biggie Smalls, and Heavy D, like I said. But they're saying none of this was presented as fact. They say it was based on years of media coverage and public speculation, things already circulating in the press long before the film aired, right? And some of that is true. Like I said, once again, it'd be no different than, you know, somebody going on YouTube and saying certain things in which they believe to be true. But one must be careful in how they present this information on any level, be it an NBC Universal level or, you know, your local podcaster or, you know, a YouTube channel or whatever have you, right? And then now NBC has filed a motion to dismiss this $100 million lawsuit. NBC Universal lawyers argued that the documentary is protected under the First Amendment. It's not claiming to prove anything. It's presenting what interview subjects, bloggers, journalists, and cultural commentators have said over the years, right? In other words, the documentary doesn't need to be true in the factual sense. It just needs to reflect what people have been saying, which it clearly does, right? So in them bringing and interviewing other people on there, they're basically saying, well, we didn't present it as fact. like I said, I would have to look at the documentary to see if it was, basically alleging that, some of the stuff that they were talking about on there were facts, if you will, right? They also argued that Diddy's own legal troubles undermine his credibility. He's already been convicted on federal charges for transporting individuals across state lines for prostitution, and that conviction came with months of damaging testimony, right? Now, that part I don't really agree with because for all intents and purposes, everybody thought that Diddy was going to be, and that's like basically saying, well, we knew he was guilty, so now that he's been found guilty of these two lessers, it makes the lawsuit truthful and right. And it doesn't. Like I said, once again, one is to be considered innocent and until they're proven guilty. So I disagree with that aspect of it, that argument that NBC basically is putting up and saying, well, hey, you know what? The fact that he's been convicted of these two different situations and these charges, the Mann Act, basically makes our claims valid. And the things that we talked about in this documentary, okay. Like I said, the First Amendment freedom. I'm gonna say the First Amendment. I believe that the freedom of speech. One can talk about whatever. Like I said, but yeah, it's a slippery slope. So NBC's legal team is basically saying you can't claim defamation when your public image has already been torched by your own actions. Now, once again, the only thing that was alleged was the civil lawsuit. And this is what I'm saying. The criminal lawsuit, when this documentary came out, the criminal lawsuit wasn't settled yet. So that's the reason why I said when they say you can't claim defamation when your public image has already been torched by your own actions. Now, once again, how far they were into the making of the documentary, was it before or after the Cassie video? I think all of those things are going to, play into this because, Cassie's civil lawsuit is one thing. Allegations are one thing. Being convicted of something and found guilty of something is something different. You see what I'm saying? So, what does the documentary talk about versus what does it actually prove? Now, that's the key and what was being alleged, if you will, right? So like I said, him being called Lucifer, I don't know. Like I said, I think that's going to be up to the judge to decide and the jury to decide when you think about it from a larger perspective. The timeline. Timeline is always in. Like I said, you can change the story, but you can't change the timeline, right? So, the deaths and public speculations and responsibility. When you think about that, the death of Kim Porter, Heavy D, and Biggie versus the public speculation and responsibility, right? Another major piece of the lawsuit references the deaths of Kim Porter, Biggie, and Heavy D, right? Diddy's legal team says these parts of the documentary imply that he was responsible. This has not only been something that has been alleged on YouTube, various other platforms, and people thinking that Diddy was responsible for Biggie, Kim Porter. Like I showed you guys that book that that came out, Courtney Burgess and the guy Chris Todd. Like I said, check out the interview over on the Art of Dialogue that I did with the guy Chris Todd. They were pushing the book. The book was false. The book was false, ladies and gentlemen. None of what was in the book was true. The Jay-Z, the Jay-Z, all of those things were lies. It was simply lies. And so I do understand this part right here being somewhat defamatory, if you will, and basically implying that Diddy was responsible for that with no proof. You can think what you want to think, but you can't basically run around and be like, yeah, he was responsible for whatever. Me, myself, even like I said, in regards to the Tupac situation, you know what I mean? And understanding the climate back then, do I believe what Keefe D said? Yes. You know what I mean? Las Vegas prosecutors just the other day basically said that they won't be trying to get Diddy to come to court subpoena him or using the statement that Keefe D had made to the LAPD and Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department in regards to Keefe D's murder case, the trial coming up in February of 2026. So, like I said, it's one thing to say I believe what Keefe D was saying. It's another thing to say that, yeah, you know, saying that somebody did something or was responsible for something that they weren't actually responsible for, right? So Diddy's legal team says that these parts of the documentary imply he was responsible, you know, for the death of Kim Porter, Biggie, and Heavy D, right? NBC fired back. Listen, this is what they said. They said, we didn't say that. We simply acknowledge what's been publicly speculated for years, and we never claimed Diddy had anything to do with it. Well, I wouldn't say that NBC, the executive from NBC, said anything, right? They're basically saying that NBC being behind this documentary, is responsible for its content and what was being implied, right? So that's why Diddy's legal team sued them for $100 million in defamation. Now, what the people are actually saying in the documentary, and so what's been publicly speculated, if it's presented like that, then NBC has an argument. If it's not presented like that, then they have a problem. So it's one thing to say that, you know what, we were, you know, just covering what was publicly speculated for years versus somebody actually getting on there and saying, yeah, he was responsible and X, Y, and Z and so on and so forth. You know, that's a whole nother thing, and them not really exercising restraint and trying to imply that, like I said, when it looked like Diddy was, you know, going downhill and going to be convicted all of this RICO and stuff like that, and only being finally only being convicted of the two lessers, right? So, like I said, you know, let's not forget, Diddy is currently in federal custody and faces up to 20 years in prison. Prosecutors want at least 51 months. We got to understand that Maureen Comey, one of the head prosecutors, was fired by Pam Bondi in the Trump administration. Like I said, for no reason, releasing no public statement at all in regards to that, right? But Diddy's legal team is seeking 21 months, and sentencing date is October 3rd. It's right around the corner. The judge denied bail after he was found to be convicted of those two lessers, right? Calling Diddy because of the violence, because of the situation that they copped to the violence during the closing arguments, during the trial. They copped to the violence in the Cassie video. You know, people, you know, Cassie actually wrote the judge. Cassie's attorney wrote the judge a letter basically saying that they thought that Diddy should be denied bail and so on and so forth. Like I said, once again, this is Diddy's first conviction for any kind of crime. He's a first-time offender. And guess what? NBC's compared Diddy's legal position to that of attorney Ariel Mitchell. So, like I said, listen, Diddy's legal team, NBC compared Diddy's legal position to that of Ariel Mitchell. Now, Ariel Mitchell was the attorney for Courtney Burgess. They were responsible for the book going on television, like I told you guys before, saying that Diddy was responsible. I'm sorry, that they had hard drives and things like that from Kim Porter, in which they didn't have. They were also, Courtney Burgess was subpoenaed by the grand jury, and nothing. He produced nothing. None of the stuff that he said that they had. Nothing. Zero. You know what I mean? And like I told you, that book, Courtney Burgess was also responsible for that book, which I didn't know at the time that I was doing an interview with the guy, Chris Todd, on the Art of Dialogue. He was behind that book. And so my thing was, oh, wow. This was a 54-page book. It was a pamphlet, ladies and gentlemen. A pamphlet of lies. And I'm like, oh, wow. They're alleging that Diddy is on tape with Jay-Z, Will Smith, all these other celebrities, and that they had basically hard drives that showed this information. It was lies. They didn't have hard drives. Like I said, that's something that's very, very serious. And like I said, this was part of the painting and kind of tainting the jury of public opinion, as well as the people who might be considered juries in Diddy's trial, because this was actually before he had went to trial. Another thing, they also said they had tapes of Diddy on tapes of Diddy with minors. It was lies. It was all lies. And like I said, why would someone want to tell a lie like that? It beats the hell out of me. But this is what people do. And this time, like I said, wanting the 15 minutes of fame, if you will, and all of that type of stuff, that's just what it is. But NBC compared Diddy's legal position to that of attorney Ariel Mitchell, who's facing her own defamation case, right, from Combs after saying she had explosive evidence against him. Mitchell's defense that Diddy's public image is already ruined and therefore not capable of being further damaged, right? You see what I'm saying? Like, hold on. So basically, that's crazy, right? Listen, you got to understand something. So they're basically saying that you're so damaged that we can say anything about you, right? Because you're not capable of, being damaged further. You already damaged goods. We can say anything. I don't know if that's legal, right? Like I said, but does it sound familiar? Does it sound familiar? So, like I said, so the question is, ladies and gentlemen, is this lawsuit about protecting Diddy's reputation, right? Is it about protecting his reputation or controlling the narrative, right? Was making of a bad boy unfair and defamatory, right? Or just a mirror to the conversations already happening in public? I don't know. I really don't know. Tell me what y'all think. Do you think somebody saying that or implying that, Diddy was responsible for the death of Kim Porter, Biggie, and Heavy D? Do you think that's basically just a mirror to conversations already happening in the public, right? Let us know what you think in the comments, ladies and gentlemen. And remember, the court will rule on NBC's motion to dismiss soon, and we'll keep you posted and as to when it unfolds. I think this is very important because when you think about the big picture, yeah, Ariel Mitchell being sued for $50 million, and NBC being sued for $100 million. We're going to basically see, and like I said, there's certain things that the judge can basically find and say, hey, you know what? We feel this, Mr. Combs has merit with these particular statements and things that were said here, but we feel like this part right here doesn't apply. And they denied the motion to dismiss. Now you got to go to court. At that particular time, I think they usually come to a settlement, but not all the time. You know what I mean? So like I said, we're going to have to wait and see what happens with this situation. But $100 million is a lot of money. And, if he get half of that, he'd probably be made whole for some of the money that he spent already. But we're going to see what happens. Like I said, NBC versus Diddy, Diddy versus Ariel Mitchell and Courtney Burgess. We're going to see if Diddy is on firm legal ground with his defamation lawsuits. Your boy Del Rey, straight gang.
Life is like some cards. It's not what you dealt, but how you play it. Play each situation correctly. I remember they used to laugh at a brother.